President Ibrahim Traore had always believed that danger lurked beyond the palace gates, but he was wrong. The real threat was walking beside him, wearing the uniform of loyalty, waiting silently for the perfect moment to strike. The armed guards at the main entrance of the presidential residence stood vigilant, their eyes scanning the darkness beyond. They had no idea that the very threat they were protecting against had already infiltrated their sanctuary. The danger they feared from outside had been living among them, breathing the same air, sharing the same meals, and gaining their trust day by day. It was well past midnight when President Ibrahim Traore finished reviewing a classified intelligence report in his private study. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on his shoulders as he closed the file, straightened his back, and muttered to himself in a tired voice. Something is brewing in Abidjan. Perhaps the French have their hands in this too, but there's no concrete evidence yet. The report contained disturbing patterns, weapons shipments to unknown destinations, unusual diplomatic activity in neighboring countries, and coded communications intercepted by his intelligence team. Each piece alone seemed insignificant, but together they painted a picture of something sinister approaching his nation. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion of countless sleepless nights spent protecting his nation's sovereignty. The revolution that had brought him to power was still fresh in his memory. The young soldiers who had followed him, the promises he had made to his people, the vision of a free Burkina Faso that would no longer bow to foreign masters. As he rose from his chair and made his way toward the corridor leading to his private quarters, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. "Cousin, I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd spend some time with you," Yakuba Traore said with a slight smile. He stood there in his black uniform, broad shoulders relaxed, maintaining his usual calm and silent demeanor. Ibrahim paused, studying his cousin's face in the dim hallway light. Something felt different tonight. Yakuba's usual easy confidence seemed strained, and there was a tension in his posture that Ibrahim's trained eye couldn't ignore. "Your duty wasn't scheduled for today," he said slowly, his instincts beginning to stir. "And you never come to the study wing this late unless there's an emergency." "My heart was restless," Yakuba replied, his voice carrying an undertone that Ibrahim couldn't quite place. "The atmosphere has felt different lately, changed somehow. I keep thinking about the old days when we were young fighters together." Ibrahim nodded gravely. "Yes, I've been feeling the same way." But even as he spoke, his mind was analyzing. Why was Yakuba bringing up their shared past tonight? Why the sudden nostalgia? They began walking together through the palace's long corridors, their footsteps echoing in the complete silence. The palace at night was a different world. Shadows stretched longer, every sound seemed amplified, and the weight of history felt heavier in these halls where crucial decisions for the nation were made. No staff members were present. No radio chatter could be heard, and even the security cameras had been turned off under the pretense of maintenance. But Ibrahim didn't know that this maintenance was a carefully orchestrated lie, part of a plan that had been months in the making. Hidden within Yakuba's jacket was a concealed pocket containing a silencer-equipped pistol. 2 months earlier, during a clandestine meeting in a nondescript hotel room in Abidjan, French agents disguised as diplomats had provided him with this weapon. Their words still echoed in his mind like a curse. "We know who you are, Yakuba. We know about your sister's medical bills, your mother's debts, money, protection, a new life in France. Just one bullet, one moment, and you'll be free from all your burdens." At the time, Yakuba had remained silent, but he had kept the gun. The weight of it had haunted him for weeks, and with each passing day, the pressure from his handlers had increased. Phone calls at strange hours, coded messages, veiled threats about his family's safety. The noose had tightened gradually until he felt he had no choice. Now, with each step down the corridor, the weight of the weapon seemed to grow heavier. This man walking beside him wasn't just his president, he was his brother, his comrade in arms, his blood. They had hidden together in bushes during their teenage years, evading government forces. They had slept in trenches, dodged bullets, and fought side by side for their nation's independence. How had it come to this? As they approached Ibrahim's chamber door, Yakuba's pace began to slow. His hand moved toward his jacket, fingers trembling slightly as they found the concealed weapon. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before them, each step feeling like a march toward destiny. But Ibrahim's survival instincts, honed by years of military training and political warfare, detected the subtle change. A slight hesitation in Yakuba's gait, a barely perceptible shift in his breathing, an aura of tension that hadn't been there moments before. Something was different about his cousin tonight. Ibrahim had survived 3 coups, countless assassination attempts, and years of warfare precisely because he could read these invisible signals. His body tensed imperceptibly, ready to react. "Is everything all right?" Ibrahim asked, turning to face Yakuba directly. His voice remained calm, but his eyes were now alert, studying his cousin's face with new intensity. Something flickered in Yakuba's eyes, maybe fear, or maybe remorse. The internal battle was visible on his features. Duty warring with blood, survival instinct clashing with loyalty. "Just tired, nothing more," he said quietly, but his fingers were now dangerously close to the gun. In that moment, Yakuba remembered their childhood together. Racing through the dusty streets of their village, sharing dreams of a free Africa, making promises under the stars that they would always protect each other. The memory was so vivid, he could almost smell the smoke from their grandmother's cooking fire. This was the moment where life and death hung in the balance. Ibrahim had faced hundreds of dangers throughout his lifetime, but never like this. The enemy's face was no longer hidden behind a mask. It was the face of family, of trust, of shared blood. As Yakuba's hand moved into his jacket, Ibrahim's military training kicked in with lightning speed. His eyes instantly analyzed his cousin's body language. The slight forward lean, the change in breathing pattern, the nervous glances toward the exits, the telltale hand movement that every soldier recognizes. When someone moves like this, it's not the gesture of loyalty, it's the signal of assassination. Lightning flashed through Ibrahim's mind. This was the moment of decision: react or die. With the speed of a striking snake, Ibrahim lunged forward and grabbed Yakuba's wrist just as the gun was being drawn. The weapon clattered to the tiled floor with a cold, metallic echo that seemed to reverberate through the entire palace. Both men grappled briefly, but Ibrahim proved faster and stronger. He kicked the gun away, sending it sliding across the corridor with a scraping sound, then drew his sidearm and aimed it directly at Yakuba's chest. Silence. only the distant hum of a ventilation fan somewhere in the depths of the palace, and the rapid breathing of two men who had just crossed a line from which there was no return. Yakuba slowly raised his hands, his face pale and drawn. His eyes reflected a mixture of shock, despair, and something else. Relief. The terrible burden he had carried for months was finally lifted. "Ibrahim, listen to me. We'll talk later." Ibrahim's voice was ice-cold, though a volcano was erupting inside his chest. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. "Right now, tell me what you've done. Who sent you?" Yakuba's breathing became rapid and shallow. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the cool night air. His voice trembled. "I had no other choice. They have my sister, Ibrahim. They showed me pictures of her at university, getting into her car, walking to classes. They know everything about our family." Ibrahim's eyes became serious. This wasn't just about Yakuba's personal weakness. This was systematic, professional. "Who are they?" "French intelligence. But they're working through intermediaries, Ivorian agents, mercenaries, even some of our own people who've been bought." Yakuba's voice cracked. "They're watching everything. If I say anything more, they'll kill us all." But there was nothing left to hide now. Everything was out in the open. The plot had failed, the betrayal was exposed, and the mask of lies had been torn away. However, Ibrahim still didn't understand the full scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just one man's betrayal, it was a small piece of a vast web, a plan that hadn't been hatched in Burkina Faso, but in the corridors of power thousands of miles away. Ibrahim's voice became softer, as if descending into some deep understanding. "How long have you been compromised?" At that moment, a terrifying scene from the past flashed through Yakuba's mind. A basement room in Abidjan, his younger sister Aminata tied to a chair, crying silently, and the voice of a French agent echoing in the darkness. "She's such a bright girl, studying medicine. It would be a shame if something happened to her." Yakuba spoke with his head bowed. 3 months. I was only trying to buy time, to find a way out. I thought I could warn you at the right moment, find a way to protect both you and my family, but they've infiltrated deep into the palace. I'm being watched myself now." Ibrahim's grip on the gun tightened. "So you're not alone in this conspiracy?" Yakuba shook his head slightly. "No, there are at least 3 others that I know of. One in the kitchen staff. He's been slowly mapping our food routines. One in communications, monitoring all our secured channels. And one among your drivers, someone who's been studying your movement patterns." Ibrahim's eyes narrowed. "Names. I need names." "The kitchen infiltrator goes by the name Drisa, but I don't think that's his real name. The communication person is someone called Fatou in the technical department. And the driver—" Yakuba's voice broke. "It's Musa." The name hit Ibrahim like a physical blow. Musa Traore, another cousin, someone he had trusted since childhood. The betrayal wasn't just individual, it was systematic, targeting the very bonds of family and tribe that held African society together. How did they penetrate so deeply into our inner circle? For the first time, Yakuba revealed everything openly. "It started during my leave 6 months ago. I went to Ivory Coast to visit our aunt. On the way back, at a checkpoint that shouldn't have existed, 2 French agents stopped me. They knew everything: my rank, my sister's university schedule, my mother's medical condition, even my childhood nickname. They didn't give me any choice, they just gave orders. They said, 'Your president is dangerous. He's turning Africa into a weapon against Western interests. If he succeeds in liberating the continent from our economic partnerships, the stability of the entire region will collapse. You can be part of the solution or part of the problem." Ibrahim absorbed these words and quietly pressed a secret button on his wristwatch, a signal that would bring his most trusted guards, the ones he knew were clean. The sound of footsteps echoed in the silence moments later. 4 commandos appeared, weapons drawn, eyes focused solely on Ibrahim's commands. "Take him to the secure holding facility, alive, without any harm. Full protection protocol. He may have information that others want to silence. I'll speak with him myself in the morning." Yakuba offered no resistance. He had been carrying this burden for too long, and in some ways, being caught was a relief. As he was being led away, he turned back once to look at Ibrahim. "I'm sorry, brother. I was weak when I should have been strong." When the guards had taken him away, Ibrahim was left alone in the corridor. He closed the door to his chambers, leaned his back against it, and took a deep breath. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage, the kind of wound that silently bleeds in the chest, where no blood flows, but the soul screams. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was something far more sinister and sophisticated. There had been no explosion, no gunshot, no spectacle that would create a martyr. They hadn't sent a stranger who could be dismissed as a terrorist. They had sent the very person he called brother, someone whose betrayal would break not just his body, but his spirit, his faith in human nature itself. This wasn't murder. This was psychological warfare designed to destroy not just a man, but an idea. The idea that Africa could trust its own leaders, that independence was possible, that the colonial masters could be resisted. Ibrahim slowly walked toward a secure safe that only opened during the most classified moments. He pulled out a file with a red seal, intelligence that had come into his possession months earlier through a defector from French intelligence. At the time, it had seemed like distant threats and theoretical dangers. Now those threats were knocking on his door as brutal reality. He opened the file with trembling hands. Every page bore watermarks, handwritten notes in French, meeting locations in various African capitals, and code words that he now recognized from Yakuba's confession. One name appeared repeatedly throughout the documents: General Laurent Brissat, a retired French intelligence officer who had supposedly distanced himself from active operations but was still pulling strings in West Africa from behind the curtain. This was the mastermind who had recruited Yakuba, who had orchestrated an earlier poisoning attempt 3 months ago in Bobo Dioulasso that Ibrahim had survived only due to his food taster's diligence. And now this assassination plot. This wasn't espionage. This was a systematic campaign to eliminate African leadership that refused to bow to Western interests. Ibrahim immediately picked up his most secure satellite phone and called Colonel Tapsaba, head of internal intelligence and one of the few people he still trusted completely. "Colonel, we have a situation. They've infiltrated the palace and struck from within. Multiple agents, systematic compromise. Should I give a general security alert?" "How deep does this go, Mr. President?" Tapsaba's voice was grim but controlled. "Deep enough that I don't know who else we can trust. But I'm not running scared." Ibrahim's voice became hard as steel. "I want to uproot the entire network. Every name, every contact, every financial transaction, every communication, trace everything. No one associated with this operation leaves the country, no one sleeps until we have answers. This is war, and we're fighting it on our own soil." Silence on the other end. Then, "Understood, sir. Full counterintelligence protocol?" "Yes, and Colonel, assume they have sources everywhere. Use only our most trusted people, the ones who've been with us since the beginning of the revolution." Meanwhile, across the border, in a luxurious villa in Abidjan's diplomatic quarter, General Laurent Broussard read an encrypted message on his secure device. The message was brief: package undelivered, courier compromised, abort current phase. Broussard didn't blink. He simply lit a Cuban cigar, exhaled smoke into the air with practiced calm, and said quietly to his assembled team, "So, the young lion still has his claws." Then with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, he added, "But even lions can be caged. Initiate contingency protocol. It's time for a more direct approach." The sun was rising over Ouagadougou, its rays filtering through the palace corridors, but with the light came not peace, but the harsh clarity of war. President Ibrahim Traore strode purposefully toward the palace's inner situation room, a bunker-like facility that had been built during his predecessor's era but never used for its intended purpose. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of a sleepless night spent poring over intelligence files and questioning trusted advisors, but his gait showed determination and resolve that hadn't been there the night before. Last night's betrayal was still fresh in his mind, but time was short. The war for Africa's future had begun, and he intended to win it. The Situation Room was completely sealed from electronic surveillance. Signal jammers lined the walls, 2 armed guards flanked the entrance, and inside all his remaining trusted advisors sat in tense silence. Trust had become a rare commodity overnight. Ibrahim entered without any formalities and spoke directly. "We can no longer operate under the assumption that our inner circle is secure. My own cousin was prepared to kill me last night, and according to his confession, he wasn't working alone." Commotion erupted in the room. Lieutenant Colonel Kabore, the security chief, stood up abruptly. "Sir, we've immediately begun comprehensive security reviews of all palace staff, recent visitors, and access logs going back 6 months." Ibrahim raised his hand for silence. "These people aren't casual infiltrators who can be caught by routine screening. They're embedded very deeply with professional training and long-term cover identities. Kitchen staff, drivers, communications personnel, they've become invisible, part of the furniture." Foreign Affairs Advisor Dr. Ouedraogo spoke carefully. "Mr. President, this isn't just an attack on your person, it's an assault on our national sovereignty itself. If they can compromise our presidential security, what other operations might they be running?" Ibrahim emphasized his point with the intensity that had made him a revolutionary leader. "That's exactly why I'm contacting Moscow and Beijing today. We need advanced cyber warfare capabilities and signals intelligence support. The French have been playing this game for centuries. We need to level the playing field." Defense Minister Colonel Damiba leaned forward. "What about our neighbors? If they can operate freely from Ivory Coast, we need to know what other regional governments might be compromised." "Good point. I want intelligence assessments on all ECOWAS member states within 72 hours. Who can we trust, who might be compromised, and who's actively working against us?" There was no disagreement in the room, but the magnitude of what they were facing was becoming clear. This wasn't just a local political crisis. It was part of a continental struggle for independence that had been raging for decades beneath the surface. In his secure compound in Abidjan, General Laurent Broussard was looking out his window at the city skyline while receiving updates from multiple sources. His phone buzzed with a coded message: "Lion is mobilizing, increased security protocols, countermeasures ready for implementation." Broussard crushed his cigar in an expensive crystal ashtray. "Excellent. The more he struggles, the more desperate he'll become. And desperate men make mistakes we can exploit." Back in his private office, Ibrahim sat alone with the weight of leadership heavier than ever before. Outside the window, Ouagadougou was waking up to another day, unaware that their president had survived an assassination attempt just hours earlier. In his mind, a storm was raging as he processed the full implications of what Yakuba had revealed. "They turned my own family into weapons against me," he thought bitterly. But beneath the anger was a growing understanding of his enemy's strategy. This wasn't just about removing one troublesome leader. It was about demonstrating that no African leader could truly be safe from Western influence. Colonel Tapsaba entered with a thick file under his arm. "Mr. President, we've begun comprehensive interrogations of the suspected agents. Some are talking, some maintain their cover stories, but we're starting to piece together the operational structure." Ibrahim looked up from the intelligence reports scattered across his desk. "What have we learned?" "The operation has a code name, Operation Mamba. The snake metaphor seems to be intentional. They strike from within, using venom rather than direct confrontation. We've identified at least 7 deep cover agents who've been placed over the past 2 years." 7? Ibrahim's eyebrows rose. Yakuba only mentioned 3. He only knew about the ones in his immediate operational cell. The network is compartmentalized, classic intelligence tradecraft. Each cell only knows about their direct contacts. Ibrahim stood up and walked to the large map of West Africa mounted on his wall. Red pins marked known French military bases, blue pins showed Chinese investments, and green pins indicated Russian diplomatic facilities. The continent was a chessboard where great powers played their games. "Colonel, I want you to do something that our enemies won't expect." "Sir?" Ibrahim turned from the map with an expression that Tapsaba had learned to recognize. It was the look he had worn during their revolutionary days when conventional tactics weren't enough. "We're not going to just defend anymore. We're going hunting." That evening, Ibrahim worked late into the night, studying personnel files, communication logs, and financial records. Each document told part of a larger story of how foreign intelligence agencies had slowly, patiently inserted their agents into positions of trust. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number that few people in the world possessed, a direct line to allies who understood the struggle for true independence. "General, this is no longer just about protecting one African leader. This is now a war for the continent's future, and we will win it by exposing their methods to the entire world." The call ended, but Ibrahim's work was just beginning. Meanwhile, in his fortified villa in Abidjan, General Laurent Brissac stood before a wall-mounted screen showing a map of West Africa. Red indicators marked French interests, blue showed areas of concern, and pulsing yellow dots indicated active operations. A shadow moved across the wall as his aide delivered the latest intelligence update. But Brissac's expression remained impassive. A new encrypted message flashed on his secure tablet. "Operation Mamba compromised. Primary assets exposed. Deploy contingency measures immediately. Authorization Alpha 77 confirmed." Brissac crushed his half-finished cigar and whispered through the dissipating smoke, "The boy thinks he's won because he caught a few small fish. Time to show him what a real catch looks like." Within hours, diplomatic pouches began moving between French embassies across West Africa. Military attachés held urgent meetings. Suddenly, several neighboring countries began expressing concerns about stability in Burkina Faso through official diplomatic channels. The next morning, a black diplomatic vehicle with Ivory Coast plates stopped at the presidential palace gates. A senior official from Ivory Coast's National Security Council stepped out and requested an urgent private meeting with President Traore. The appointment was unusual. No advanced diplomatic protocol, no scheduled appointment, just an urgent plea for immediate access. Ibrahim paused for several minutes, consulting with Colonel Tapsaba before granting permission. This could be another trap, but it could also be intelligence from an unexpected source. We'll meet him, but with full security protocols. In a specially secured room within the palace, one swept for electronic devices and monitored by Ibrahim's most trusted guards, the Ivorian official spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Mr. President, I want to be absolutely clear. I didn't come here on any official government orders. What I'm about to tell you could cost me my career, possibly my life." He paused, looking directly into Ibrahim's eyes. "But I believe you deserve to know what's being planned against you." Ibrahim leaned forward. "Continue." "The French operatives who turned your cousin have also compromised someone much closer to you, someone who has access to your daily schedule, your security protocols, your most sensitive travel plans." Ibrahim's heart seemed to stop for a moment. "Who?" "The Captain Moussa Traore, head of your personal transportation security. Your cousin and, according to our intelligence, someone you've trusted since childhood." The confirmation of what Yakuba had already revealed hit Ibrahim like a physical blow, but he maintained his composure. Moussa, the quiet, dependable cousin who had driven his motorcade through the most dangerous parts of the country, who had never once complained about the risks, who had been like a younger brother to him. What do they want from him specifically? "Complete intelligence on your motorcade security routes, backup plans, safe house locations, and most critically, the timing and routes for your upcoming address to the African Union. They're planning something far more public than a quiet assassination." Ibrahim absorbed this information without visible reaction, but inside, his strategic mind was already working. "Why are you telling me this?" The Ivorian official looked uncomfortable. "Because some of us in the region believe that what happens to Burkina Faso will eventually happen to all of us. Today they target you for your independence. Tomorrow it might be any leader who doesn't comply with their wishes." Ibrahim stood up slowly. "I understand, and I want you to know that your courage won't be forgotten." After the official left, Ibrahim called Colonel Tapsaba immediately. "Bring in Moussa, quietly, no drama. And Colonel, I want this done with absolute discretion. If he really is compromised, I don't want his handlers to know we're onto him yet." Within 2 hours, Captain Moussa Traore was discreetly brought to the palace's secure interrogation facility. Unlike the dramatic confrontation with Yakuba, this arrest was conducted with surgical precision during a routine duty rotation. Moussa was told he was needed for a security briefing, a common enough occurrence that it wouldn't raise suspicions among any potential watchers. The interrogation began immediately, but Moussa's response was completely different from his cousin's emotional breakdown. He remained calm, almost serene, showing no signs of nervousness or contradiction. His answers to questions were consistent, his body language was relaxed, and he maintained eye contact throughout the questioning. After 3 hours of intensive interrogation, the lead officer reported to Ibrahim, "Sir, either this man is completely innocent of any wrongdoing, or he's received extremely sophisticated training in resistance to interrogation." Ibrahim stood behind a one-way mirror, watching his cousin answer questions with disturbing composure. Questions raced through his mind, but silence weighed on his lips. Have my blood relations really become this cheap to buy? Or is there something else going on here? Moussa's calm demeanor was unsettling. This was the same person Ibrahim had played with as a child, who had learned to drive in Ibrahim's father's old truck, who had been entrusted with protecting the president's life on countless occasions. Now that same Moussa sat in an interrogation room, either as a traitor or as an innocent man being wrongly accused. But then Ibrahim had an idea that would change everything. A plan that was as audacious as it was dangerous. He called his closest advisors into a secure conference room. "We're not going to take the defensive approach anymore. We're going to control this game from now on." Colonel Tapsaba looked puzzled. "What do you mean, sir?" Ibrahim outlined his strategy. "We're not going to break our suspected agents through interrogation. We're going to use them as conduits for disinformation. If they're really working for French intelligence, they'll continue to send reports, but from now on, those reports will contain exactly what the enemy wants to hear." Dr. Ouedraogo raised her eyebrows. "You want to turn them into unwitting double agents?" "Not unwitting. I want them to know exactly what they're doing, and I want them to choose Africa over France." Ibrahim's voice carried the conviction that had inspired a revolution. "But if they won't choose willingly, then they'll serve our purposes anyway." Colonel Dambiba frowned. "That's an enormous risk, if it backfires." "Then we'll be no worse off than we are now," Ibrahim replied. "But if it works, we'll turn their entire intelligence operation against them." The plan that Ibrahim devised was elegant in its complexity. Both Yakuba and Musa would be apparently pardoned and quietly reinstated to their positions, though under constant invisible surveillance. To the outside world and to any French handlers watching, it would appear that the president had either been fooled by their cover stories or had decided to show mercy to family members. But in reality, every message they sent, every piece of intelligence they reported, every movement they made would be under the complete control of Ibrahim's counterintelligence team. It was a puppet show where the puppets didn't realize they were dancing to a new master's tune. Whatever information they transmitted to their French contacts was actually crafted by Ibrahim and Colonel Tapsaba's team. False operational schedules, fabricated security weaknesses, artificial political disputes, fictional intelligence leaks. Every word, every document, every supposedly secret conversation was carefully constructed deception. The disinformation campaign was comprehensive. There are disagreements between the president and his defense minister about foreign policy. Security at the Eastern Gate has been reduced due to budget constraints. The president will be traveling to a regional summit with a smaller than usual security detail. There are rumors of military units questioning the president's leadership. On the other side of the border, in his Abidjan headquarters, General Laurent Brissac's hands were continuously filled with these false signals. Each piece of intelligence seemed to confirm that Ibrahim Traore's government was weakening, that cracks were appearing in his support base, that the time was ripe for a decisive strike. Every report made Brissac more confident in his assessment. His subordinates congratulated him on the success of Operation Mamba, believing that their deep-cover agents were providing invaluable real-time intelligence about a crumbling African dictatorship. But inside the palace, President Ibrahim Traore's team was in complete control of the information flow. This was warfare by deception, silent, patient, and potentially deadlier than any conventional military engagement. The psychological pressure on the compromised agents was immense. Both Yakuba and Musa were caught between loyalty to family and fear for their own family's safety. But humans aren't just intelligence assets, they also have consciences that can be awakened. One evening, after weeks of this double game, Musa entered the palace library, one of the few places in the compound that had been deliberately left without electronic surveillance, a space where private conversations could still occur. He found Ibrahim there, reading by lamplight. "I can't continue this charade anymore." Musa's voice trembled with exhaustion and guilt. "I'm lying to you, to them, to myself. They promised to protect my family if I cooperated, but now I realize I'm destroying the very future I was trying to protect." Ibrahim looked at his cousin, seeing not an enemy agent, but a young man who had been caught in an impossible situation. "Tell me everything, Musa, from the beginning."
They recruited me 6 months ago during my mother's hospitalization. The medical bills were enormous, and my salary couldn't cover them. A man approached me at the hospital, claiming to be from a pharmaceutical company offering assistance to families of government employees. Musa's voice broke. By the time I realized what was happening, they had photographs of me accepting their money, recordings of our conversations, and detailed knowledge of my family's situation. Ibrahim's voice was calm, but filled with deep certainty. "We will protect your family, Musa, but I need just one thing from you: the courage to help us turn this operation back on its creators." Musa looked up with hope flickering in his eyes. "I don't know if what I've done can ever be forgiven, but if this is for Africa, if this can help prevent other young men from being trapped like I was, then I'll do whatever you ask." Meanwhile, in Abidjan, General Brissac was pacing in his operations center, studying the latest intelligence reports from his Burkina Faso assets. Wall-mounted screens showed satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and detailed assessments of Ibrahim Traore's supposed vulnerabilities. "Something doesn't feel right about this," he muttered to his chief of operations. "The intelligence is almost too good. Everything is falling into place too neatly." But his subordinate shrugged. "Sometimes operations just go smoothly, General. Our assets are well placed, and Traore's inexperience is showing. He's making rookie mistakes." But Brissac's instincts were nagging at him. After 40 years in intelligence work, he had learned to trust his gut feelings. "Perhaps, but I want independent confirmation of these reports. Deploy our backup assets for verification." However, time pressure was mounting. Political developments across West Africa were creating a narrow window of opportunity for decisive action. Several governments were questioning France's continued presence in the region, and Ibrahim Traore's influence was growing among younger African leaders. "We attack within 48 hours, Brissac decided, before he could consolidate more regional support. But what Brissac didn't know was that Ibrahim was already prepared. Every piece of intelligence that had led to this decision was part of an elaborate trap. Every map was a deception, every reported weakness was actually a strength, every supposed vulnerability was a carefully prepared killing ground. As soon as French-backed militants began crossing Burkina Faso's borders at what they believed were lightly defended points, they walked directly into Ibrahim's forces. The Burkinabe military was ready, positioned according to the real operational plan that had never been compromised. The clashes were brief but intense. Instead of finding the confused, demoralized defenders they had been told to expect, the infiltrating forces encountered well-prepared, highly motivated troops who knew exactly where and when to expect them. Within hours, dozens of militants were captured, along with their equipment, communication devices, and, most importantly, their orders and contact information. The documentary evidence was overwhelming: detailed attack plans, funding sources, coordination instructions, and the complete organizational structure of the operation. International headlines exploded across every major news network. Burkina Faso president exposes foreign plot. French shadow operations in Africa revealed. Colonial networks uncovered in West Africa. The story dominated social media, with the hashtag #AfricaRising trending globally within hours. The captured documents were methodically released to international media, creating a cascade of revelations that implicated not just French intelligence services, but a broader network of economic and political control that had operated in the shadows for decades. Captain Ibrahim Traore faced the international press without notes or prepared statements. The press conference was broadcast live across Africa and around the world. Behind him hung the flags of Burkina Faso and the African Union, symbols of sovereignty and continental unity. He leaned toward the microphone cluster and spoke with quiet intensity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, representatives of the global community, and my fellow Africans watching from across our great continent,
Today, we have not merely thwarted an assassination plot, we have exposed a system of control that has operated in darkness for generations. Ibrahim paused, letting his words settle. The evidence we have gathered reveals a network of manipulation that extends far beyond one country's borders. This was not just an attempt to eliminate one leader, it was an assault on the very idea that Africa can chart its own course in the world. He held up a thick folder of documents. These captured communications show detailed plans not just for my removal, but for the systematic undermining of any African government that dares to prioritize its people's interests over foreign corporate profits. The colonial mentality that once ruled through direct occupation now operates through economic pressure, political manipulation, and, when necessary, elimination of non-compliant leadership. The audience was transfixed. This wasn't just a political statement. It was a declaration of independence for the 21st century. But today marks the beginning of something new. The shadows have been illuminated. The puppet strings have been cut. Africa will no longer be anyone's chess piece in global power games. Thunderous applause erupted, not just from the journalists present, but from crowds that had gathered outside the palace, in city squares across West Africa, and in solidarity demonstrations as far away as South Africa and Kenya. This wasn't just the failure of one covert operation, it was the sound of awakening. A new spirit of resistance was spreading across the continent. People took to the streets with handmade signs reading, "Africa for Africans," "No more puppet masters," and "The lion has roared." Social media exploded with support from across the African diaspora. Young people in London, New York, Paris, and Toronto organized solidarity protests. African intellectuals published articles analyzing the broader implications of the revelations. Even some Western media outlets, initially skeptical, began investigating similar patterns of interference in other African nations. Inside the palace, Ibrahim sat with his core team of advisors, watching global news coverage of the developing story. Every major international network was running continuous coverage, and the story was evolving in real time as more evidence was analyzed and released. "Sir," Colonel Tapsobe reported, "we've received communication requests from over 20 African heads of state. Many are reporting that they're reviewing their own security arrangements after seeing our evidence." Dr. Odriago added, "The African Union has called an emergency session. They want you to present the full intelligence briefing to the continental body." Ibrahim nodded thoughtfully. This was never just about Burkina Faso. Every independent-minded leader faces similar pressures. By exposing one network, we've given others the tools to identify their own vulnerabilities. Defense Minister Dambiba entered with another update. "Mr. President, we've received a formal diplomatic protest from France. They're denying any official involvement and claiming that any French nationals involved were rogue agents operating without government authorization." Ibrahim could help but smile grimly. Of course they are. The standard playbook: deny, deflect, and disavow. But the evidence speaks for itself. Meanwhile, Yakuba and Musa, who just days ago had been considered traitors, were now being debriefed as key witnesses in what was becoming an international incident. Their decision to fully cooperate with Ibrahim's counterintelligence operation had provided crucial insights into how foreign recruitment networks operated. Colonel Tapsobe noted, "Their testimonies are proving invaluable for understanding the psychological pressure tactics used in recruitment. We're sharing this information with other African intelligence services." Ibrahim reflected on the transformation. Those who were broken can often provide the best guidance for healing.
Their experience with the enemy's methods makes them valuable teachers. In France, the revelations were causing political earthquakes. Opposition parties demanded investigations into intelligence operations in Africa. Newspapers that had long ignored African affairs suddenly had front-page stories about neo-colonial networks. Human rights organizations called for accountability and transparency in foreign operations. General Laurent Brissac, his carefully constructed operation in ruins, sat in a secure room in Paris, answering uncomfortable questions from his own government's review committee. His decades of experience in African operations, once seen as expertise, was now viewed as a liability in an era of increased scrutiny. But for Ibrahim Traore, this was just the beginning of a larger mission. 3 weeks after the failed assassination attempt, Ibrahim Traore stood before the African Union General Assembly in Addis Ababa. The Great Hall was packed with heads of state, diplomats, and observers from around the world. This wasn't just another routine diplomatic gathering. It was a moment of historical significance.
Fellow African leaders, Ibrahim began, what happened in Burkina Faso was not an isolated incident. The evidence we've gathered reveals a pattern of interference that affects us all. The methods may vary, but the objective remains the same: to ensure that Africa remains a source of resources rather than a generator of solutions. He gestured to a large screen that displayed a network diagram showing connections between various foreign intelligence operations and African political crises over the past decade. Economic pressure, political manipulation, targeted elimination of resistant leadership, these are the tools of modern colonialism. But knowledge of these methods is our first defense against them. President Akufo-Addo of Ghana leaned forward in his seat. This was the kind of frank discussion that rarely happened in formal diplomatic settings. Ibrahim continued, "I propose the establishment of a continental security intelligence network, a system where we share information about foreign interference operations, coordinate our responses, and provide mutual support for governments under pressure." The response was immediate and positive. President Kagame of Rwanda requested the floor. What President Traore has exposed in Burkina Faso, we have seen shadows of in our own countries. This network approach could transform our collective security. Within days, the proposal had overwhelming support. The African Union voted to establish the Continental Early Warning System for Foreign Interference, a network that would monitor, analyze, and respond to external threats to African sovereignty. Back in Burkina Faso, the impact of these events was transforming the national consciousness. University students organized seminars on African independence and self-determination. Military academies began teaching courses on asymmetric warfare and counterintelligence. Young entrepreneurs started technology companies focused on African solutions to African problems. A professor at the University of Ouagadougou told her students, "President Traore reminded us that the enemy isn't always wearing a foreign uniform and that freedom is achieved not just with weapons, but with wisdom, courage, and unity." The revelations from Burkina Faso had ripple effects far beyond Africa. In European capitals, parliamentary committees began investigating their country's intelligence operations in former colonies. International law experts debated whether certain forms of political interference constituted violations of sovereignty that should be prosecuted in international courts. In the United States, congressional committees reviewing foreign aid programs began asking harder questions about how assistance money was being used and whether it was creating unintended dependencies. China and Russia, long criticized for their influence in Africa, suddenly found themselves with moral high ground in international forums, pointing to the exposed Western networks as evidence of hypocritical policies. But perhaps most importantly, the global African diaspora began organizing in ways not seen since the independence movements of the 1960s.
African communities in London, Paris, New York, and other major cities held conferences on supporting continental development. African investment in African businesses increased dramatically. Young professionals of African descent began returning to the continent in what some economists called a reverse brain drain. Ibrahim received reports of these developments with satisfaction, but also with awareness of the challenges ahead. "We've won a battle," he told Colonel Tapsaba during one of their evening briefings, "but the war for Africa's true independence is far from over. Those who have profited from our resources and our divisions won't simply accept this new reality. Indeed, as international pressure mounted for accountability and reform, new challenges were emerging. Cyber attacks on Burkina Faso's government systems increased. Economic pressure through international banking systems intensified. Disinformation campaigns began spreading on social media, attempting to undermine Ibrahim's credibility and paint him as an unstable radical. But something fundamental had changed. The exposure of the assassination plot and the foreign interference network had created a new awareness, not just in Burkina Faso, but across Africa and beyond. The old methods of control were no longer operating in shadow, they were under global scrutiny. 6 months after that night when Yakuba had drawn a gun on his cousin, Ibrahim Traore addressed the nation on the anniversary of Burkina Faso's independence. The speech was broadcast live across Africa and streamed globally with simultaneous translation into dozens of languages. "My fellow Burkinabe, my fellow Africans, my fellow citizens of the world," he began. "6 months ago, we discovered that the greatest threats to our sovereignty came not from distant enemies, but from those who had been placed among us. Today we can say with certainty that our house is clean, our future is secure, and our path forward is clear." He paused, looking directly into the camera. But this victory belongs not just to Burkina Faso, it belongs to every African who believes in the possibility of true independence. It belongs to every young person who dreams of a continent that stands as an equal among the nations of the world. The camera pulled back to show the massive crowd gathered in the national stadium. Flags from across Africa waved in the audience. This had become a Pan-African celebration. "We have learned that unity is our greatest strength, that truth is our most powerful weapon, and that the courage to confront difficult realities is the price of freedom." In cities across the continent, viewing parties had been organized. In Accra, Lagos, Nairobi, and Johannesburg, young people gathered to watch what many were calling the speech that changed everything. Some will say that what we have done is dangerous, that challenging powerful interests will bring consequences. They are right about the consequences, but wrong about the danger. The real danger would be to remain silent, to accept that Africa must forever be junior partner in global affairs, to believe that our children deserve less than any other children in the world. The speech continued for another 20 minutes. Outlining specific policies and international partnerships that would reduce dependence on traditional colonial powers while building new relationships based on mutual respect and shared interests. As he concluded, Ibrahim's voice carried the passion that had made him a revolutionary leader. "To those who have profited from our divisions, who have treated African lives as expendable, who have believed that they could control our destiny from distant capitals, your era is ending. To our African brothers and sisters, wherever you may be, your time is beginning." The roar of approval that followed could be heard for miles around the stadium. 2 years after the events that would become known as the Night of Revelations, historians and political scientists were already analyzing the long-term impact of Ibrahim Traore's exposure of foreign interference networks in Africa. Universities across the continent offered courses in 21st-century independence movements. The story of how Yakuba and Musa had been turned, caught, and then converted into assets for African interests, became a case study in modern counterintelligence. Children in Burkina Faso learned about the importance of vigilance against external manipulation, but more importantly, they learned about the possibility of resistance, about the power of truth to overcome deception, and about the strength that comes from continental unity. The Continental Early Warning System that emerged from Ibrahim's proposals had prevented at least 3 other foreign interference operations in different African countries. Intelligence sharing between African governments had reached levels not seen since the earliest days of the Organization of African Unity. Economic indicators told another part of the story. Foreign direct investment in Africa from non-traditional partners had increased dramatically. Intra-African trade was growing at unprecedented rates. Brain drain was slowing and, in some countries, reversing, as young professionals saw new opportunities on their home continent. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological. A generation of young Africans was growing up with a different understanding of what was possible. They had seen that foreign powers were not invincible, that African leaders could successfully resist external pressure, and that the continent's resources and talents could be harnessed for African development. On a quiet evening 3 years after the assassination attempt, President Ibrahim Traore walked alone through the palace gardens where he had once confronted his cousin's betrayal. The same paths where trust had been shattered and then rebuilt were now peaceful under the African stars. Yakuba, now serving as head of the palace's counterintelligence training program, approached from the shadows. But this time, his presence brought comfort rather than fear. "Cousin," he said quietly, "do you ever think about how different things might have been if I had pulled that trigger?" Ibrahim smiled, an expression that combined wisdom with sadness. "Every day. But not with regret, with gratitude. Your moment of weakness became Africa's moment of strength. Your betrayal exposed their methods to the world." Musa joined them, as he often did during these evening walks. His transformation from compromised asset to trusted advisor had become a symbol of redemption and second chances. "The French networks are trying to rebuild," Musa reported. "New methods, different approaches, but they're operating under much more scrutiny now." Ibrahim nodded. "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, but at least now we know what we're watching for." As they walked together through the gardens, the 3 men represented something larger than their individual stories. They embodied the possibility of transformation, the power of truth, and the strength that comes from confronting difficult realities rather than ignoring them. The palace lights reflected off the fountain where Ibrahim had often sat during the darkest moments of his presidency, wondering if Africa could ever truly be free. Now, as he listened to reports of African innovations, African solutions to African problems, and a new generation of leaders emerging across the continent, he had his answer. The lion had indeed roared, and the echo was still reverberating across an awakening continent. The age of shadows was ending, and the age of African light had begun. In schools across Africa, children closed their textbooks on the story of President Ibrahim Traore with these words: "This story teaches us that the greatest victories come not from destroying our enemies, but from transforming our weaknesses into strengths, our betrayals into lessons, and our individual struggles into collective power." The final lesson of the Lion's Gambit wasn't about warfare or politics. It was about the human capacity for growth, forgiveness, and the courage to imagine a better future, even in the darkest moments. As the African proverb says, "When the roots of a tree begin to decay, it spreads death to the branches. But when the roots are made strong, the whole tree blossoms." The roots of African independence had been made strong, and the continent was beginning to blossom in ways that its colonial masters had never imagined possible. The story of one night's betrayal had become the foundation for a continent's rebirth. This story is dedicated to all those who believe that truth, courage, and unity can overcome any conspiracy, no matter how deep or how old. It is dedicated to the young people of Africa who dare to dream of a continent that stands as an equal among the nations of the world, and to those who have sacrificed for that dream.